Hello everyone, I'm your host Matthew from xarmors.com, and this time on video we welcome Kent. Bye. Hi Kent.
Hello, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. It's different time zone, and I'm really glad you had time for us. I really wanted to discuss with you your work first, and then a few XR topics before the end of the year. But this summer you went through a 1,000 podcast on Voices of VR. So congratulations.
Yeah, thanks. So, I started the podcast in May of 2014. I had got my Oculus DK1 on January 1st. I ordered it of 2014. And a few weeks later, I went and participated in Game Jam here in Portland, Oregon, and created an experience. And then I just got really interested in the process of designing immersive experiences. And I felt like part of the best way to learn about XR design would be to travel to these different conferences that were happening and talk to a lot of the creators from the community just to get insights as to what they were learning, what they were seeing, what the affordances were of this medium. I feel like that's a bit of a oral storytelling culture of
Yeah.
like knowledge transfer through a lot of these meetings that have happened. And I end up going to anywhere between 70 to 80 now with the virtual events, over 100 events over the last 7+ years. Um, and recorded around 1,600 interviews, oral history interviews, and published over 1,000 of them now. And a big focus for me has been on immersive storytelling, just because so much of the affordances of the medium are being explored by these immersive storytellers. And for me, it feels like kind of the bleeding edge in terms of where experiential entertainment is going in the future. And so I've just been really um, curious to go to these different film festivals, whether that's Sundance, South by Southwest, and Tribeca, and the Venice Film Festival and the IFA Doc Lab. A lot of these festival scenes where a lot of the cutting edge of these immersive storytelling experiences are showing, and then try to see as many of those experiences as I can, and talk to as many of those immersive story, XR creators of immersive stories as I can as well, just to get their insights as to what they're seeing, what the patterns are, and what the underlying affordances of the medium are.
All right. And for this long time at 1,000 episodes, it seems like I have some work to do to catch up on things. But hard question is, do you remember in particular one or two episodes?
One and two episodes that stick out. Well, I mean, the episode 1000 has 120 different quotes, and so in some ways that are the ones, the 10% of those quotes that were really jumping out. And there's a number of different contexts and topics, and depending on whether it's medical
Yeah.
or education. I guess one that I'll just throw out there is having a chance to talk to Tom Furness in 2015, which Tom Furness, a lot of people um, cite Ivan Sutherland as someone who is, a big part of creating the first VR headset with a sort of Damocles in 1968. But Tom Furness was actually working on some of these immersive technologies even earlier, kind of behind the scenes at the Air Force in like 66, 67. And so he's, pretty much been working nonstop for over 50 years in
Yeah.
virtual and augmented reality. So just to be able to meet him and get his story, and also to hear him say that the ultimate potential of VR was to get you to be connected to reality more, which I always thought was kind of an interesting idea for someone who's been in VR for so long, to say that the ultimate potential of it would be to allow us to find new ways to be connected to the IRL real world around us. I personally have different ways of thinking about, the virtual versus the real. So over time, I think that it's less of a differentiation between what's real and what's mediated, what's synthesized, and it's, for me, more about the immersive experiences that are going to be possible, and less of an emphasis on the distinction between the virtual and the real, and more of what are
Hmm.
the qualities of those presence that you're able to facilitate within these mediated environments, and those can be just as real or just as meaningful as any other experiences in real life.
Yeah, sure. And what struck me when I discovered your podcast is the whole thematics you can speak of, like education, ethics, narratives. How do you work around that? Is that the opportunity of meeting new people lead you to talk about education or ethics, or if you have in mind something you and then you look for people, someone to speak with?
Well, I mean, part of the great thing about these immersive technologies is that they really are going to have, just like the internet has been able to have an impact on all these different domains of human experience, and also mobile phone and mobile computing. Just the same. I think that XR technologies, both virtual and augmented reality, are going to be able to impact all these different domains of human experience. And so, part of the my process was to go to these different events and to see, who was there, what companies were there. There's often booths that people are showing whatever their wares are for these immersive technologies, and a lot of them were focusing in on these different industry verticals. And so, just by the nature of covering the industry, it allowed me to kind of meet a lot of the frontier thinking, pioneering, experimental, trying to take the early approaches for how to translate and apply these immersive technologies into a wide range of these different industry verticals. And it was through that of just meeting a lot of people who are on the bleeding edge of their industries, to be able to learn everything from like neuroscience and storytelling and education. And the ethical issues were more along the response for people thinking about the implications for
Hmm.
privacy and our neuro rights. And so that's been a big focus, just because I think with every technology you have a lot of great affordances, but you have a lot of things that are risks and harms for the
Hmm.
technology. And they kind of go hand in hand, where you have to not only accept the new affordances, but there's also ways that the culture has to evolve to create either sense making frameworks and technology policy frameworks, and just as users in general, how to cope and deal with the network effects of these new immersive technologies, and how's it going to shift culture, how's it going to shift our society. These are big questions that we've already seen the negative impacts of some of those things within social media. And so, not only trying to learn from a lot of those things and apply them to the XR technologies, but also even more so extrapolating out into what's it mean to have all these neurotechnologies and virtual and augmented reality, the blending and blurring of realities, and the different contextual issues and the privacy issues, and so many other, you know, I guess, ethical issues that are going to be brought up. And so I've just been trying to facilitate those conversations, because it's really difficult for one individual on their own to sort of map out the full landscape of all the moral, the ethical and moral dilemmas of XR technologies. And so that's been a focus of mine, of trying to kind of map out some of those different contextual domains, but also to try to figure out what are some appropriate ethical frameworks for how to deal with these technologies. But for me, I have an insatiable curiosity. So XR is so fascinating to me, because I just get a chance to talk to a broad range of different people, who are looking at the technology and applying it in different ways. And yeah, it just, for me, it just satisfies that curiosity that I have about where the future is going, and what we're able to do now and where it may go in the future.
Yeah, and I just come back from Stereopsia in Brussels, which is one of the last event of the year, and it's a place where producers and institution were quite worried about the place of the big companies in the field. And you covered that a lot about the Meta Facebook situation, which is a great opportunity for us to stream project and to help produce project, but also on the other side, it's a all horizon slash metaverse buzzword, which is feeling like we are giving our fate to one company. What's your thinking? What do you think now, after the last news?
Well, so as I look at a lot of like what happens and why, we have the purchase of virtual reality by Facebook, now Meta. The Oculus was back in like March of 2014, and it was, I think, an indicator to the larger technology industry that the technology had matured to the point where it was now ready to start to have this shift from things to be kind of relegated into the enterprise market with tens of thousands of dollars to be able to have these immersive technologies. There was the phase in the 90s where that was still trying to, the technology, all the other ecosystem uh, technology in terms of GPUs and everything else, and to even run a good virtual reality experience, that the technology had kind of matured to the point where it was ready to actually make a viable play into the consumer market. And I think we're in this transitional phase of having going from the Oculus DK1 to the DK2 to the CV1 to the different iterations of Gear VR and then Oculus Go and eventually the form factor of the Oculus Quest 1 and then Quest 2. That's a lot of different, for every year that VR has been out, there's been more than one major innovation when it comes to the convergence of both the standalone form factor of mobile VR versus the PC VR. And there's been this, settling on that the standalone without the wires is really the form factor that's going to maybe have that doubling year over year to get to the point where it's at the market penetration that is going to be a real viable ecosystem for content creators. Now, the issue, I guess, is that there hasn't been other companies that have been as dedicated to the platform as Meta has, and part of the reason why is that whenever there's a platform shift, there's usually maybe a couple of big winners, is what we've seen in terms of especially the mobile phone. You have a bit of a duopoly between Apple with iOS and Google with Android. And so that means that companies like Microsoft and Facebook at the time, but now Meta, they really kind of missed out on the boat for they had to always deal with the rules of both Apple and Google with their operating systems for mobile phones. And so there's an incentive for them to make a real leapfrog into the next platform where they're willing to dump billions of dollars into helping to not only build the technology, but to cultivate that content ecosystem. So I think because of the flow of capital and the reason for that, there's only a handful of different companies that could really, make that big of an investment and a choice. And they've been leading, but at the same time, there hasn't been a lot of market competition. That's, probably in part because of the larger anti-competitive strategies for these tech companies for so long that they've been just able to not only acquire different companies that are in the industry, but also content creators. And we have this situation where there isn't really a really great competitive consumer a consumer competitor to a standalone HMD of the Quest. There's Pico VR and there's other Chinese companies, but really there hasn't been the same type of effort and initiative from the other major tech companies, whether that's Google or Apple. Things are always imminent and on the way. And even Microsoft's approaches have been, not so great. Probably the biggest viable, other major companies have been these other companies like Valve, producing their own hardware, but also HTC. So we have, kind of the biggest players being these players that don't have a foothold on these other markets. And so for them, they really see it as the future. Now, in terms of the different types of anti-competitive behaviors, for me, I think it's the threats to privacy, that the business model for Meta of surveillance capitalism. And there seems to be no real effort to do a completely new paradigm in terms of what the new business models are going to be. They seem pretty content to apply the same type of target marketing and advertising into this new metaverse realm, which means that we're going to have a lot of targeted marketing, a lot of ways in which that we are making these decisions to support a company that is subsidizing this hardware in order to, in the future, is told me in one of my interviews that we're mortgaging our privacy. There's ways in which that we're, getting something for free up front or for reduced cost. And the side effect is that we may be living in an immersive environments where we are constantly bombarded by technologies that are trying to violate some of our fundamental human rights. From the neurorights is a group of folks who are neuroscientists who have put forth a number of different principles, whether it's the right to identity, the right to agency, and the right to mental privacy. Those are the big ones that I think that as you have immersive technologies that are watching us in these contextual relevant information, they're capturing what Britton Heller calls biometric psychography. So paying attention to all this information and trying to judge moment to moment what our likes and dislikes are, what is happening within our body, what our behaviors are, what our emotions are, what we're thinking, and then what our actions and body actions and what our physiological reactions are when we're in these environments and seeing these stimuli, and then a big effort to try to do that contextual mapping of understanding the context and then understanding how we're reacting to that context to then create this psychographic profile for what Heller calls biometric psychography. So this is, I think, the frontier of trying to find and define what those neuro rights are, and then from there have either human rights law and then being enshrined within the laws within the United States, whether that's a new federal privacy law, or other ways to make it feel like we're actually protected from these companies that are encroaching on all these different intimate aspects of our identity, who we are, our actions, our behaviors, our mental privacy. And ultimately, if there's a good enough map, they could start to nudge our behaviors that would undermine our agency. So it's sort of like, a lot of the dreams of the metaverse and where we're going is all really exciting. And I'm terribly excited by all the potentials and possibilities. But at the same time, I'm still terrified that it doesn't seem to be a viable way in order to make sure that all these different neuro rights are protected, especially by these biggest players.
Yeah, and especially that the biodata we can find in VR are way more intimate than just a smartphone. And we get used to smartphones, and we kind of don't remember about the data we give to the companies. But do you see maybe some positive waves of that can be can be a good future for working with such big companies? Do you see Facebook not a threat somewhere, or is it?
Well, for any I guess technology, there's kind of the proprietary walled garden approach, and then eventually there's going to be more
Yeah,
open approaches. And so, but the open approaches hardly ever come first. It's usually the closed proprietary. Even with the internet, there was like AOL and CompuServe, and eventually we had the more open, HTML and web that was something that was in some ways having more links to other websites. And Metcalfe's law says that the value of the network is kind of the number of nodes, whether that's websites or people, and you square that number. So the network becomes valuable the more diversity you have in terms of the range of both people and content that's there. And I feel like maybe we'll eventually have that same dynamic here with whatever the metaverse turns out to be,
yeah,
where there's a lot of apps and closed wall gardens and everything being, really driven and controlled by a handful of companies. Eventually are we going to see something that like the progression of the internet and that same sort of open interoperable, values, and Tony Parisi came out with a list of the 7 rules of the internet or of the metaverse, and basically saying that we're modeling the metaverse on the internet and the open web and trying to have some of those same principles. So, what happens with Meta and all of this in terms of not only the content and the open interoperability aspects of the ecosystem, there are some positive indicators of, say, like the creation of the wide overall industry for open standards like OpenXR, to be able to get down at the hardware level from whatever the hardware is that the application is in APIs and SDKs, that there's a little bit more of a consistency across all these different players, and
yeah,
that it's really encouraging that that Meta is moving towards this OpenXR future that is going to allow people to create these experiences that or have OpenXR integrations that may be agnostic in terms of where you are watching it and what headsets are going to be compatible. So we're certainly not there yet. We're certainly in the realm of platform exclusives and ways of kind of um, trying to amplify the hardware technology through a lot of anti-competitive types of behaviors, or just behaviors that are business minded to try to create these closed walled gardens. So that's the one dynamic, and how we are able to really handle the other aspects of these issues around privacy. I think it's going to have to probably come above and beyond what the market dynamics are of that will need like legislation and policy that's
yeah,
able to clearly define some of these things so that we are going to be able to be protected in a way that not only has the laws but have a way to enforce those laws, because you can pass a lot of laws but unless there's a way to viably enforce it, then they're going to continue to go down this path that is going to allow them to pretty much have free reign to establish whatever those new norms are. There's going to be a lot of new normative standards in terms of what we accept as a culture to be okay. And the challenge here is, in order for a lot of the technology to work, you have to use a lot of these technologies that are very encroaching in the most intimate aspects of our lives. Um, and it's some stuff that up to this point were only available to like high end medical grade technologies that would be ruled by the medical context and having rules that were protecting that data. But this is essentially having that same type of biometric and physiological data, but into a company that is driven by a business model of surveillance capitalism. So I think these are some of these issues are larger issues that go beyond like just the
Yeah.
uh, there are laws that need to pass, but also just looking at Epic Games versus Apple, the duopoly within the mobile phone area, Epic Games really tried to break that up and say, hey, we need to have the opportunity to have more competition, and we can't just live into a future where all of the technologies with the mobile phone, that there's a 30% tax even to put a piece of hardware on that. Which, if you imagine what that happened with the computers, and if back in the day, and Tim Berners-Lee and Vint Cerf, if they decided to do a similar type of tax, then we would not have companies like Google or Facebook, because basically any commerce that would be happening on the communication media would have one person that was getting all that money, and that's essentially what we have with mobile technologies. So we, from a kind of a infrastructure way of antitrust, we don't necessarily have a good way of preventing the cultivation of monopoly, uh, infrastructure for the way that we've are enforcing different aspects of antitrust. So that's discouraging in the sense that there's not like a clear way to be able to prevent what's already happened in the duopoly with iOS and Google. We're kind of seem to be destined to go down the exact same path without much deviations, despite what Zuckerberg has said in terms of complaining around how Apple has been doing that. Meta is implementing the exact same roadmap for just copying and mirroring exactly what iOS has been doing, without any clear indication for creating a real viable open alternative. So I think that there's a lot of things that are at the cultural level, at the legal level, at the economic level, and then the actual technological architecture that drives into ultimately what the user experience is. So it's like a set of nested contexts that we are having to navigate in order to understand where the future of the technology is going.
Yeah, that's we need to be cautious about that. On the creative part, you may be one of the on the few people that tried most of the virtual worlds. What do you think about the state of the virtual worlds, as the metaverse is not yet defined, but we using VRChat, Engage, Altspace? What do you think about the features, the multiplicity of them?
Well, I think that if you look at all the domains of human experience and you look at the complexity of all that, the virtual worlds were going to start to mirror the full range of all those different diversities of different experiences. However, most virtual worlds are focusing on one of those specific domains for what they find is the most interesting or compelling. I like to think about, when I think about the affordances of VR, we often talk about presence, but I think there's different qualities of presence. I say there's like active presence where you're expressing your agency. There's mental and social presence where it's more about talking and communicating, or getting a real sense of exploring more abstract concepts or ideas. And then you have the emotional presence, which is much more around not only stories but feeling connected to the building and releasing of tension through music. I'd say like the musical platforms are really tuning into that, creating that emotional vibe. And then the embodied and environmental presence are the ways in which that you have avatar representations and also worlds that are being built. So I think each of the different metaverses are either coming from that center of gravity of starting with one of those different qualities of presence, or you have the cryptocurrency worlds that are more focused on less of the experience and more of the economic, exchange and the value exchange of that. And so you have like Somnium Space, or the Decentraland, or Crypto Voxels, or Sandbox. Each of these have their own way in which that they're focusing first on the economics and the value exchange that happens through the crypto worlds, but the actual experience isn't that great. There's basically like a ghost town. You go there, there's nothing there. People have like these shells of these virtual lands that are kind of a lot of built around speculation around the potential value of this later. But right now, the
Hmm.
experience, like Decentraland, you can't even have a fully immersive VR experience in any of these worlds. It's all kind of mediated through a 2D platform. And so many Space and also CryptoVoxels have more, a lot better virtual integrations. But if you go back to the major, VR platforms, you have probably the biggest is Rec Room in terms of the VR integrations. Roblox is actually shipping different integrations, and they may be, in this discussion in a way that we haven't been talking about quite yet, because most people that are in Roblox are still using the 2D interface.
Yeah,
But you have
sure.
Rec Room, which is really focusing on active presence. You have VRChat, which is really focusing on both embodied presence through the avatar culture and the worlds, the world building that's there with being able to upload Unity worlds. So there's a lot more robust world hopping and avatar innovations that are happening within VRChat. Rec Room is more about games and interaction, and there's also quite a lot of economic exchange that's happening there. They probably have the most robust economic system of any of the virtual worlds that are out there, especially with the VR integrations. And then you have, the old experiences that were more focused on like the Wave XR for music based, but we've kind of they pivoted into just more producing, music videos and other virtual concerts for musicians rather than really focusing on that. So we don't actually have a world that's really focused on emotional presence so much. Although you do get a lot of that within, say, VRChat, some of those different
Hmm.
experiences and more narrative experiences that you see. Some of that within Rec Room or VRChat, but not a virtual world like the Wave XR, which I'd say was probably the paradigmatic example of like of a social VR world that was really focused on the emotional experience because it was all about music and creating a vibe. And the last, in terms of like the mental and social presence, you have a lot of alt space where you are going in and having these different virtual worlds and interactions, um, where it's more about like meetups and professional networking. Like a lot of the different professional conferences I have will have like after parties or gatherings within Altspace. However, Altspace also has Burning Man. So they have the Black Rock City VR,
Yeah,
BRC, BRC VR, which is probably the most sort of emotional, artistic expression to go and have like a quite an adventure within the alt and within Burning Man. So it's kind of a weird contrast to have like the most enterprise corporate, so professional networking mashed up with like Burning Man. But there weren't a lot of other VR networks that allowed the Burning Man crew to upload Unity builds,
yeah.
and so that it gave them actually the most freedom, and they've kind of carved out their own kind of network there because of that. So that's at least how I start to map out some of the different metaverses, or metaverse, social worlds, and that over time you're going to see like VRChat have more of the economic background. The Who knows where Altspace is going to go? They're probably the most like, who knows what the vision of where Altspace is going to go from the perspective of Microsoft. But probably, if I were to make a guess, an enterprise play where they have it kind of tuned for having, onboarding. Accenture is an example where they bought 60,000 headsets from
Yeah.
Oculus, and they've been using their onboarding there. So yeah, I think over time you're going to see it, get more robust out, and having each of the different worlds have a full range of different types of different qualities of presence, but also the different domains, of whether it's education or, engage was the other one that, is really focusing on education. So that's really the kind of mental social presence as well, and the different, learning opportunities that happen. um, but so there's going to be maybe a center of gravity where if you really want to have like the best education experience, then maybe go to Engage. If you wanted to give like a talk that is able to have thousands of people, Altspace is probably, one of the better choices there. But over time you're going to make it so that a lot of those differences are probably going to be like um, less clear, but there's certainly going to be a culture for each of those that are the shared set of values. And like I said, Rec Room's all about gaming. VRChat's all about, world building, identity, and kind of exploration. And Altspace is a lot of and also Engage, a lot of the, networking and exchange of information and of cultivating these clusters. And I guess I shouldn't forget the Meta Horizon, or the Horizon Worlds from Meta,
Yeah.
which is just launched. And so I think it's probably trying to do a bit of the Rec Room and the mental and social presence, but still too early to know if they're going to do either one of those particularly well.
Yeah, and the great human factor inside of each one of them is that there are communities very well alive. You mentioned Burning Man, but also VRChat or Engage. You met a lot of folks and really independent people, creators working to build virtual worlds. That's something fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, it really any one person could dedicate all their time of just trying to keep up to date with all the stuff that's happening. One that I didn't mention was Neos VR, which I think is probably one of the more interesting ones in terms of they have the cryptocurrency, and also the Meta Movie project was based in Neos VR. So in terms of like innovation, I'd say like Neos is probably one of the dark horses that's out there, but that
Mm.
keep an eye on Neos in terms of what they're able to do with. It's probably the most complicated, user interface, but probably the
Yeah.
most powerful in terms of developers being able to create worlds within the virtual environments. And Rec Room probably has the best in-world VR world creation that's out there, the most evolved. But Neos VR, I think, is kind of creeping up in terms of having enough developer tools for developers to really go into a world to be able to make experiences. So I think that's another the actual world building process. And maybe as we look at the comparison between Rec Room and say Roblox, whether or not Roblox is going to be able to have as robust of the different in-world creation tools that say Rec Room has. So a lot of the user generated content, there's a lot more uh, innovation that I'd say is happening in Rec Room when it comes to the worlds that are created within the worlds. And a lot of what the Horizon Worlds is trying to do is that same type of in world. But the thing that Rec Room had was a lot of first party content that was really driving a lot of engagement with just awesome experiences like paintball and all the different stuff that they've had. Whereas Horizon didn't. I haven't really fully explored it yet. It just opened like last week, and I've been busy. I haven't had a
Yeah.
chance to really do a deep dive. But I'll be really curious to see if they bring in like third party developers to be able to create proper experiences. I know they're giving away $10 million to be able to help kickstart some of that, but um, what Rec Room was able to do was this fast iteration and have kind of in their bones a game design and game development, and so they started with creating really compelling immersive experiences, like kind of starting with the conceit of the Wii Sports of VR, but trying to
Mm.
figure out what was the most compelling. And they really hit a lot of the sweet spots of, still today, if you go into Rec Room and play, paintball, it's really compelling and fun. And it's not so easy to just always come up with stuff that is that fun and that engaging within these different worlds. So, yeah, and as we're talking about all this, Fortnite is a whole other thing that doesn't have
Yeah.
anything to do with VR, but they're, in terms of the most robust kind of metaverse ecosystem and games, they're also a game company that has started with their game, and because of that, are maybe going to be easier to expand out into all these other things. And Roblox, a big focus on gaming as well. So I think if there's anything to be learned, it's like the folks who start with the gaming can have the draw people there and then expand out. The question I have is whether or not like people go into Rec Room to really have that social interaction, or if they end up going towards something that's really organized towards that type of organic type of socialization within VRChat. But because each of these worlds take different approaches for what they're prioritizing, it cultivates different cultures.
Yeah.
And people can kind of be independent from those cultures, but the way, just even way that the interfaces are designed are kind of tuned to be able to either send you towards gaming experiences or send you towards world hopping or exploring, or try to, like an alt space, try to gather you with some strangers, like more of like the meetup.com or the professional networking, to allow you to connect to topics that you're really interested in. But it's hard to kind of like do everything equally, because you have to make
Yeah.
these trade-offs between those different things.
Yeah, I guess 22 will be an interesting year to follow that trend. Maybe last part of our chat is about storytelling, because you met and interviewed a lot of creators for the last 7 years. What's your view on the current state of XR storytelling? There is a lot of new format, from 360 movies to interactive installation, LBE, streaming platforms, and creators are doing a lot of different things. But the way we do XR content today feels like it's way more mature, and we starting to understand what we do. Do you have that feeling from the last 7 years that there's a real progress?
Well, I think there's certainly been a lot of experimentations and innovations that have been happening within the festival scene and the festival circuit. So the New Frontier at Sundance, and you
Yeah,
have the Tribeca Immersive Storyscapes, and you have South by Southwest, and then there's the Venice Film Festival, which is probably the one festival that has VR on equal footing the most with the film, given that it's has
yeah,
proper competition. And then IFA Doc Lab, and there's a series of other different regional festivals. The 5 Hours Festival also has a lot of 360 video, and other ones that are still emerging. But those are the ones that I keep track of throughout the year. And I've seen that there's still year over year there's a lot of innovations that are still happening. And then the challenge, I'd say, is in distribution, because even though a lot of amazing work has been happening, you often have the case where you see it at the festival and then you have to wait either a year, 2 year, or more. Sometimes, like, I think just now there was Draw Me Close, which I think I first saw at, like, Tribeca 2017, is just now out,
oh,
like, having a run. So it's basically like a gap that could be up to like 5 years later, where things take 4 or 5 years later that you see something and then it's finally made available. So for me, as a somebody who's covering this stuff, that's particularly challenging, because then it ends up being a little bit like a theater piece. Like, you kind of had to see it or you
yeah,
didn't, which means that I like to talk to the creators and really dig into stuff. And it's always preferable for me if people have a chance to actually see the experience first and then listen to the conversation. But because of the lack of distribution, robust distribution options, I think with the pandemic, you had something that was cultivating for a roadmap for a lot of, or, a pathway for a lot of these immersive stories to go into like more museums, because of the you're able to, for those creators, reach a, a critical mass of maybe 5,000, 10,000, or 20,000. Who knows what the
yeah,
number is in terms of how many people are going to see it, but it's smaller than, or makes it more economically viable to be able to pay and fund a lot of these different projects. And so, because of the focus of both Steam VR um, and the Meta with gaming, there's been so much focus on building out the gaming ecosystem, but not so much
yeah,
focus of really building out robust distribution options for these immersive stories. Certainly, Meta has been funding and promoting and distributing a lot of these different experiences, but on the whole scale, in terms of the percentage of work that's being done year over year, most of the stuff never gets released, and most of the stuff never really gets seen. I think part of the challenge is that there's been this shift towards the mobile, standalone headsets, and still a lot of the most cutting edge immersive stories are being done on the PC, meaning that it's
mm,
technologically easier to do, but yet, as time goes on, as the standalone ecosystem builds out, then I think the creators are going to have to perhaps adapt to be able to optimize their experiences, or change their experiences so that it is maybe tuned for the more standalone market, if they want to get it out and released on in mass. Anagram Group with Goliath is an
yeah,
example of a piece that is being released on the Quest as well, but also having a successful run within the festival circuit. So there's certainly examples. The Key is another example that was released on the Quest. It originally was on the PC. Um, and The Line is another example that was an award winner at Venice that was able to be made available. And eventually, you have some different experiences like Wolves in the Walls, or um,
sure.
Battle Scar, or Gloomy Eyes. These are all experiences that premiered on the festival circuit and then took a year or 2 or 3 years to be able to make it out onto the Quest. And that seems to be that gap seems to be closing. But because there's only say 300 or 400 Quest experiences, but yet there's a whole lot more experiences being created, then you have App Lab. That's not really a great viable option to be able
Yeah.
to get stuff out there. So it's really kind of a dire situation. I'd say if anything, the Viveport is probably one of the dark horses in terms of being able to not only cultivate and curate for these festivals to be able to distribute some of these different immersive experiences in a more of ephemeral fashion, but sometimes those stay up and available on Viveport. So you end up seeing some of the
Yeah.
most cutting edge immersive storytelling experiences on Viveport because they're just not really being emphasized on anywhere else. Like they don't really fit on Steam, and Oculus is only really focusing on now with the Quest compatible different types of experiences. So maybe as we move forward, if we start to have more cloud streaming or ways in which that you would be able to have the experience that's a high fidelity experience, but it's something that's streamed into a standalone headset or remotely. Maybe that's an option that happens over the next 5 or 10 years, that we see more of these experiences that we see at festivals end up in these standalone headsets. Or there's other distributors or other options that emerge that really make it a viable platform. You have Netflix or Hulu or Amazon Prime. You have these companies that are probably looking at some of these, and they did some early experiments, but they've really kind of gone AWOL in terms of they're not actively funding or supporting the different types of experiences that we see on the festival circuit. So there's a gap right now in terms of the quality experience versus how having robust options to get a lot of people to see these experiences. It seems to still be kind of a niche thing, but I expect over time that's going to continue to grow and expand because you have like the IMLX lab, with Star Wars experiences. They've been watching these and kind of tracking it. So, and also, the Chris Pruitt gave a talk at the Connect 2021 saying that the original demographic survey that Meta did back in December of 2020, they basically picked a number of different gaming or demographics for different people who use these VR headsets. And the top three were basically all gaming oriented, with the
Yeah.
majority being male. And Chris said at the Connect 2021 that the one that they're trying to grow is the story based types of experiences that have actually a majority of female that are enjoying those different types of experiences. And so I think over time you're going to likely start to see Meta even start to support more story based experiences, but probably still in the gaming context. So
Yeah.
a game that has it's like a narrative game rather than a narrative immersive story proper that's just really focusing on the story with no kind of gamification. So yeah, that's what I see right now is where the state is, and it's to be determined in terms of how that's going to continue to grow and evolve. I know for
Hmm.
me personally, I still really enjoy watching these experiences and talking to the creators, and I always do my best to try to see as many of them and talk to as many of them as I can. The challenge then becomes like only a handful of people end up seeing it, and then so in the conversation sometimes becomes a bit of a documentation of that piece if you didn't see it, um, which is important because the these pieces that people are seeing are inspiring in future pieces. So there's like a lineage
Yeah.
of work that's being done that a small handful of people within this community of immersive storytellers are keeping up to speed and watching them. And that's influencing the overall future of the medium. But because it's not like millions of people seeing these things, then there's it's disincentivized for the media to even cover it, which is a challenge. Because I know that there's uh, you know, like coverage from The Verge and Addie Robertson. She was doing a lot of stuff in the beginning, but because the view counts were so low, the editorial staff within these larger
Yeah.
organizations don't even cover it. And even Road to VR, Upload VR, VR Scout, there's I think XR Must has probably, you're probably doing some of the most robust coverage of this
Thanks.
community, and
You as
really,
well.
you're doing a great job of keeping up the speed with everything, and almost kind of recreating the IMDb of XR with a lot of these different
Mm.
stories and just tracking what's showing where. And you know, these stories and these experiences, there's not a lot of folks that are really paying attention to it yet, but that's going to change, I think, as we start to see the theater crowds coming in. And Oregon Shakespeare Festival
Yeah.
commissioned a number of different pieces. And so you start to see these established ecosystems and communities starting to blend in some of their communities into the production of XR. It's like an interdisciplinary fusion across all these different communities. Most of the XR community has been with the center of gravity of gaming, but there's been a strong contingent of the cinematic storytelling that has been at the festival scene, but that hasn't had the same emphasis in terms of promoting that work and getting it out in the hands of people. And I think over time we're going to start to. That's what I expect to see is people that are coming more from the film industry and Hollywood and storytelling, starting to explore more aspects of the medium, but matched up with game developers and theater makers and playwrights, and to be able to really push the medium forward as we go into the next phase of the metaverse.
Yeah, and thanks for your words. But and I think we are quite a few to speak about XR storytelling and trying to understand it. I see so many interesting initiatives online from the theater people and etc. But coming from the cinema industry again, I have the thing that the LB needs to expand like VR room and VR theaters, but physical, just to let people, general public, addressing the content. The other thing, there is something to play. I mean, we get Area 55, we get Dreamscape, we get Sandbox, we get I have Galaxy Network from Deviation also trying to build exhibition. There is a lot of initiative, and always I see a public, I see people coming to try VR, even first time people.
Yeah, like I was saying, that the pandemic, it like there was the location based entertainment, and like you were saying, like
Yeah,
the Dreamscape and Void, which
yeah,
folded and maybe coming back, but a lot of the stuff that was showing in museums, and just having like going from the festival run into like the run around the museums, but because of the COVID, a lot of that outlet was shut down, which would shut down investment because there's not possibility to get the return on the investment in the same type of way, financially at least, that you would. So I think there we have been in a little bit of a limbo state. And as things start to potentially come back, then I think there's going to maybe open up more of those, especially as we look at like these things like Area 50, Area 15 or
yeah,
whatever number they have. So the reverse of Area 51, but the place in Las Vegas that is
yeah,
has like a Meow Wolf kind of having a place there off the strip in Las Vegas, but in Las Vegas proper, having like immersive entertainment that is going to um, have, as people have been locked up and shut down and sheltered in place, having these immersive entertainment options. I think there is going to be like a contrast that's been created where people, when they do want to go out, they want to have a really fully immersive, interactive types of experiences. And so I expect to see, as time goes on, more and more of these, live action role play, or the Sleep No More or Then She Fell type of immersive theater scene blending with the XR technologies. Um, and the live performance aspect, the meta movie project is another thing that I think is really
yeah,
quite compelling in terms of an experience and where that whole future is going to go. So, and then I just mention out like Arcane of Riot Games, and so having
yeah,
these companies that we've had a lot of. If you look at the top movies over the last like decade or the last 5-10 years, it's a lot of been uh, intellectual property from Disney, whether that's Star
yeah,
Wars or the Marvel comics or DC Comics. And so as you get these video game companies that start to move and pivot into creating films, you have the Riot Games that created Arcane, which is an amazing piece of work, but they have an entire world that's been built out with all these characters and dynamics. And that type of world building is going to be kind of the generation of future intellectual property as we move forward. And so people are wanting to, probably going to pick their favorite worlds that they want to be in, and be able to have these immersive experiences where they're able to really feel like they're immersed within this world. And that's what you see with Star Wars and a lot of
yeah,
these different things moving forward with these different, go check into a hotel and be there and have all these different immersive experiences that are happening there within the context of Star Wars. And so, yeah, there's actually No Proscenium is a podcast that is really tracking really closely a lot of that immersive theater scene, and VR is certainly there as it's been expanding. But they're having a conference that's coming up here in January, I think 7th, 8th, and 9th, where they're going to be having a lot of that community come together to talk about some of those latest and greatest things.
All right, that's a good word for the end. Last short question is, what event will we meet you next?
What event? I'm not sure. I mean, I'll certainly be at Sundance. I still haven't decided whether I'm going to this event that's put on by No Proscenium. I think it's called Next Stage. That's happening at the beginning of the year. I may be there in real life, but I'll be there virtually at Sundance, Tribeca, Venice, probably South by Southwest. Each of these festivals, thankfully, have had these different virtual components. So I'll be able to cover a lot of these things remotely. So I'll be seeing experiences there. And then I don't know, I feel like, over the last couple of years, how I do my coverage and where I go and how much is a real need to be on site. I went to the Augmented World Expo, which was my first event in nearly 2 years, and was able to get hands-on with a lot of different of the latest technology. But I think less so, a lot of the immersive industry is going to be less reliant on those conferences. I don't imagine that we'll go back to what I call like the golden age of, XR conferences that were, one every 3 weeks or so, where there was a big event that was bringing the community together. I feel like the industry has matured to the point where that's not as needed as much to get everybody up to speed as to everything that's happening. And so, because of that, then my own travel schedule is, as I move forward, where do I decide where I go, what to cover? But for me, I think the immersive storytelling community is one of the more interesting ones, and I'll continue to dive deep and to see the experiences and try to talk to as many of the different creators as I can.
All right, thank you very much. Going after the 2000 podcast, maybe.
Yeah, like I said, I've recorded 1,600 interviews, which means that for every podcast I've published, there's, every 2 podcasts I've published, there's another one that I haven't. So yeah, just trying to make my way through the backlog, but also keep up to speed as to how all this continues to unfold.
Cool. Thank you very much, Kent. We can find you on social media, of course, on the Voices of VR page, and we can support you through Patreon, right?
Yeah, patreon.com/voices of VR. That's how I am able to sustain a lot of this coverage. So if you do find value in that, please do consider becoming a member of the Patreon. Yeah, I'm on Twitter at KentBy, and I have the Voices of VR podcast, which you can find at voicesofvr.com.
Cool. Thank you very much. And if you like this video, of course, you can follow us, and following XRMUS, we share a lot about Kent. So this is a circle. Thank you very much, Kent. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thanks for having me.